Jovan Strika from ElastaLink. He is a Canadian-based telecom IT service provider focused on delivering fully integrated enterprise-grade solutions affordable to Canadian small and medium businesses. It ranges from voice, video, chat, email, collaboration applications. I know he's also touched into the IoT space a lot, and internet hosting services. He also has a lot of business technology solutions that help improve the business. I've known Jovan since, I think 2006, maybe thereabouts. And his services were utilized in my previous workspace and successfully. So with all that said, I'm going to stop and over to you, Jovan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. We've been thinking about this whole journey from day one when we started offering the services as being in technology. Things are changing rapidly, and being kind of one-stop shop where we help businesses to achieve their growth through different type of technologies. We realize is that we're having a challenge of dealing with a lot of different expertise required in an organization, and certainly processes were essential for us to kind of streamline and see how we can improve that, how we can bring on board new employees, and also internally improve the communication. So part of presentation today will cover a little bit of essentially what business process is, because I was not sure of how audiences, how expertise are when it comes to business processes. So the guys who are quite advanced in that area, bear with me. I'll just kind of walk through just initial first presentation of the process, and then dive into really how we as an organization face the challenges, and how from being kind of a user and trying to implement this led us to actually develop our own platform for processes. Right now, this is mainly for our internal use. But eventually what we're looking is how that can help other business customers and allow them to improve their operation using our platform. So if everybody's okay, I can start sharing a slide and dive into the presentation. All right, hopefully you all can see my screen. So as I mentioned, we are a service provider, and when it comes to technology, there is many services that businesses require. When you think about this, typically a lot of businesses are working with a single or maybe one provider for single service. Maybe eventually they offer more than one, but typically they work with a multiple different service provider, and the companies are specialized in one single service at a time. So maybe you have somebody for internet service, the other one for email, somebody else for host your website. What we realize is that it's a quite a lot of complexity for businesses, especially if they don't have in-house resources to be able to manage all of these different service providers. So our business model from the day one was kind of taking that complexity out of businesses, sort of outsourcing all the major IT services to us. And then we kind of are the only single phone call that they need to make. We take over responsibility and we take it from there. What that becomes a bit of complex from operational side on our end, because as I mentioned, each of these services represents sort of a different business. And on top of it, what was very important for us to integrate all of these components together so that users can have can have a kind of a single pane of glass from where they can manage services, but also from our internal point, how we can make that effective. So what kind of led us to the concept of business processes and how we can implement this. So what today I'm going to go through is first what it is, explain a little bit of stakeholders and lanes and that interaction with the different parties, show a few examples, clarify some differences between processes, project procedures, and policies, and then go through the stages of the business process management. A lot of that is out of research and different perspectives that I was taking through this journey. And I'm talking about the last 15 maybe years, if not more, since sort of a business started, I realized need for it. But there was on the way a lot of challenges that I found trying to implement this within our different business ventures. And part of that led us to do some of internal development, which I'll if we get a chance, demo it and go through final stage, which is the benefits and questions. So, I mean, from a high level, the business process series of steps that are performed by stakeholders to achieve specific goal. And the part of what is always a question is about these stakeholders is the teams and people that interact with all of these different type of tasks that are defined in the business steps. And they can be also the system that can automate that whole process instead of doing things manually. And the whole concept of the process that it's a very specific outcome, so you know the goal. It has a beginning and a start, very clearly defined what initiates start and what is and when it's kind of end and process finished. That can be measurable and ideally repeatable, because the whole concept of the process is that it makes sense investing into defining it only if it will be used many times. It has to be the opportunity is to be flexible, so not necessarily very linear, that you have a steps that you go through, but it can be flexible, that there is a certain decisions that needs to be made all through the flow, and that can kind of change the flow of the process as it goes. So a couple of challenges that we as a business experience is that when in our business look into interactions, we kind of define this a middle lane or middle type of groups, which is our internal resources, and I kind of listed just as a couple of type of departments that we internally have. So maybe somebody doesn't really have inventory control in their business, or maybe implementation stage, but clearly every business eventually have different groups that have their own different responsibilities, and typically they need to interact. So in our case, we're dealing with the customers as well as suppliers, and when we look at the processes that are engaging, usually are handoff between customer and us internally, or us communicating with suppliers. And all of them are prone to change. Some of them are very customized because certain suppliers might have a different process in place. Also with the customers might be different size or industry that requires a bit of refinement. So that is kind of a very high level view of complexity in defining process for business. It's very highly customized to your business. There are certain kind of traditional processes in place, like hiring new employee, or conducting surveys, or anything that is billing or preparing financial results. But a lot of processes are very much custom that cannot be necessarily incorporated, but needs to be kind of adjusted as you go. These are known as the lanes, and a part of the process definition is defining within the process as you go how you interact with other lane and what is the data exchange between them in order to accomplish the process. Few examples: hire employee. So pretty much it's very simple, and most of us were already building within organizations sort of processes or on the way to define it, but we really never understood that that's what we were doing. That might be just the defining tasks that we follow. Maybe it's in kind of internal or created as a projects and kind of define the steps. But we kind of all experience, even with the inception of the business, you have a probably your first a kind of a repeatable process within your business was identified and could be captured in this kind of a shape or form. So hiring employee goes through in this case communication between HR department internal and obviously new candidate. And as you probably see this, that I didn't identify previously that new candidates are another kind of a lane. I left it as more kind of internal, but interaction of any parties within your business should be defined and as actors and stakeholders, and we can then define these tasks between them. Similar on the sales side, support. So every different department had its own kind of a process that can be defined. I want to step back just from the point of, what are the differences between process versus project, procedures, policies, like a big 4 Ps here. We have a project is something new. When you are experimenting, when you're trying to build something, that's sort of a more project, because you don't have clearly defined decisions you're researching. You certainly have a task as well as you build a project or use a bit of a template, but eventually when that project emerged into repeatable process, that's where repeatable steps, and you incorporate on an ongoing basis, and it's sort of matured as this is the right way to do and identify what are the challenges. Then it's a good timing to define it as a process. So point is not being very early in definition of the process. From the procedures are sort of more in instructions, and it can also look as a similar as a process, but it's a kind of defined actions or instructions, and they're usually linear. And what we found is that procedures can be attached to the process or a specific part of the process. So if you need to provision a device, in our case, we need to configure the phone. We can have a procedures of how you do this, and it's independent from the process. The process might have a say is like, you need to provision device, and in check mark when it's done. But how you do this might be a document that is attached to that process, and it's procedures of how to do this that can help employees to train them in that task. And then the policies are more documents that help you making decisions. So when you're uncertain of what to select or what is the choice, the policies can help understanding how to make the decision and guide them to make the choice. Again, part of a document that can be attached to the process and help them accomplishing removing the error and accomplishing the task. Now, when it comes to stages, this is kind of a 3 stages that we define, or 3 groups of stages that we define. And again, a lot of this is coming from a different take to the processes. Now, part of what I wanted to highlight is that business processes have a different shape or form, how different organizations define them. And what was what led us to kind of our view is the standard called BPM, Business Process Management. That was a standard that is accepted by many organizations. And there was a lot of resources available that presented, I would say, more about design and defining how a process will look like and describe, rather than kind of defining execution and reporting part of it. So we kind of felt that specification is not very much detail, gave a lot of freedom for interpretation, especially when it comes to execution and reporting, but introduced the guidelines of how you document that, and that it's consistent between different organizations. So in the design stage, we kind of separate these 5 main steps, which is the discovery. And discovery, I'll go through the design stages more in the detail, but discovery, mapping, specification, integration, automation. It's the kind of stages that are part of a creation of the process. Once the process is created, then execution stage is really where resources can take advantage of this process. So it's the starting from your employees to also being able to activate this maybe from website form being completed or a phone call being made, and that is triggers start of the process and obviously the finish of the process. And then once it's completed, collection of completed processes can then be taken to measure, to analyze, obviously monitoring the state, and then eventually identifying what are the areas of improvements, and then going back to design state to then apply changes and improve the process. And that's kind of a cycle that goes through. And challenge that we identify was why processes are not widely accepted. And that's the part where when we look into what is the blocking organizations to embrace this process, we found several different answers. And it not necessarily in one specific stage. So first is the tooling. Is the tooling really user-friendly for users to identify? Creating the diagrams, is that a hideous task, or it's a more intuitive tool? When you define specification, which is part of that is the building the forms that eventually users will interact with, how flexible they are. Are they visually appealing? Because if the system present a hideously looking screens, that can turn away users from enjoying into the process stage. The integration is another big challenge, which is how you bring the data into the processes. A lot of systems and platforms are defined as a kind of a standalone platforms, and as a product, they don't hold your data. I mean, they hold the data that is generated through the process, but not really the rest of the business data that you might have. So integrating with different systems, a lot of them, they call it adapters, requires customization. Some of them are out of the box that you can use with the popular systems. And now it becomes even easier on some integration because a lot of businesses are using cloud services. Therefore, from that perspective, it's easy to connect because it's kind of online. Where before, when you use a local QuickBooks or some kind of a local application, integration is quite difficult, especially if they're not sitting in the kind of the same location. And then the automation is what is separated from integration. Automation is more taking some of the services, some of the tasks, and automating that into the what we call service tasks. Things that can happen magically and suddenly it's done. And part of that is identifying what needs to be and what can be automated, and then taking maybe multiple steps that take too much time into kind of service and automating that so that it can execute much faster. And I'll come now through some of the steps and explain a little bit more in the details. But the couple of other challenges that we found with the existing systems is that the integration was very difficult to make. Automation required a different type of development resources, or have to outsource and hire somebody else to develop them. As I mentioned, specification and definition of the form was not as intuitive. And then when it comes to execution stage, that's another challenge that we were facing. A lot of these systems require users to connect to the platform, see what are the tasks that are waiting for them, and then once they execute this, the whole concept of delegating this task to somebody else, or if somebody goes on vacation, handoffs to another resource, being able to get notification as the execution is happening, and more importantly, leveraging newer type of communication platforms. So instead of having just the user forms as a way to interact, what about SMS? Can process send a message to decision maker, and then somebody can just reply on SMS and say yes, approved, rather than going to the link and waiting to see if there is approval that they need to allow it or not. And further, we're talking into other type of chat systems, MS Teams, Slack, lookalike, that are now taking more and more internal business communication from phones and from emails into kind of live chat. How much of that can be integrated with this process? We are also providing phone service. So part of this was, can we actually design the call flows that when customer calls, some of these questions might be prompted as a as a voice as a voice message, and we record their answer and interpret this as the answer. These are all modern communication that we rarely see any of the business process management platforms now taking consideration. Also, a big part of the kind of notification, I would like to be notified one way, somebody else different way. How flexible that is, and how easily can adjust, especially now with mobility in place and people working from home. We needed that whole execution to look more natural, as more conversation to the system, rather than needed to connect and perform these tasks in a kind of very dry environment. And final stage about monitoring, about reporting, is being able to real-time see the status and react. And part of this is also how much system can actually let you know if the task is taking too long, or if we're waiting for customers to provide certain data, how we inform that customer, remind them, and then after maybe 2 reminders, escalate to somebody internally that can try to reach them over the phone. A lot of this part is what was missing in other platforms in order to be really effective in completing the process. Measurement part is also essential to understand not only how long it took the process to finish, but also as we go through these different steps, how we see where delays are and why the delays are, and once you have a bit of data points, then look into what is the essentially things that needs to change. Clearly, analytics and KPIs extracted from this, especially if you improve certain process, you change the form, or if you see the users, your employees stuck on certain questions just because they were not sure about what the answer is. That's where we need to be able to refine it and then test another version, get a data, get KPIs, and then really being able to share that internally with the whole organization, of course, management. So this is areas where led us to take a hard decision, which is, okay, we need this as an organization, and we couldn't get something off the shelf that can be well integrated with the rest of the platforms we have. But at the same time, we recognize that other businesses are facing the same challenges, and that's where we started development of this type of system within our platforms. And our platforms are developed internally using the development framework that we created over the years. And shout out to Elaine and Philip, who are a big part of that team to deliver not only the process management tool, but also the framework that is used to rapidly develop these type of systems. And more importantly, that allowed us to rapidly change it and alter as we go. So what we're hoping is that with some of the questions and feedback from this audience, we will definitely take it and being able to improve that on the next version. What I wanted to kind of walk through maybe just a few examples of some stages and screenshots that you'll probably see in a moment with a demo. But I want to kind of more focus on some of the stages and things that we change. So in the discovery, where you're kind of first defining the processes, you're kind of defining, in this case, customer survey process. You take the basic information, who are the actors or lane stakeholders that we talk about it. You can estimate a time and duration, department who is involved, priority. But part of what we wanted to also capture is this experimental pseudo flow field that I'm showing highlighted. And idea was how we can, through the first interviews with users, capture information in plain English that can not only describe the process, but also use to later convert that into the diagramming tool that is next slide that I'm going to show in a moment. So that's kind of one thing that we are in that stage separating from other systems that we saw available. On the mapping tool, the mapping or diagramming is the process that pretty much when you talk about a business processes, the first thing you kind of see is visual interpretation, which is the flow diagram. And in the BPM standard, there are predefined shapes that are used to represent the flow. The pool or lanes are defining different actors, and pretty much with what you see here in the bottom is the example of the customer survey that has no interaction with other lanes. It's kind of single lane. But if there is interaction between, let's say, sales and a customer, or support and a customer, or HR department with new candidates, they are defined, their tasks are defined in their own lanes, and then you have interaction between them. The flow objects are start or end event, and then activities. And these activities can be different types of activities. The two that I will highlight here is what I call the user activity or user tasks and service tasks. And here we visualize them as with a different icon. Well, user task is manual task, and typically there is an interface defined in order to accomplish that task, where service is, again, kind of automated service defined that needs to receive some data, and obviously after it's accomplished, bring results into the flow so it can be used by other tasks as we go, or just output altogether when the process is finished. And between we have a messages. The one important part is the gateway, and that's kind of a decision maker when you are asking on a gateway a specific question, or the question, such as for us in this case, do you have internet service? It's part of a question that was asked during the select services. Then the gateway can then take this flow and branch it into the different in different direction depending on the answer. So these gateways are what really makes that flow flexible rather than just single linear steps, and that can be quite complex. There are also other elements attached to it. I will just mention the group comments data object. There is a concept also of the taking complex process into sub-processes, which means is that if something is repeatable and used by multiple processes, you can group them and then create that as a sub-process so that it's easier to manage and definitely reuse the work that is done in this stage. That is the kind of mapping step. When it comes to, oh, by the way, and in our implementation, we used the library that allowed us to create an online editing of this form. And I'll show this kind of drag and drop. You put it, you click, you edit the properties, and in the demo, I'll show quickly how that looks like. But here you have a bit of some screenshot, which is on a second step, which is once you define a user task, then you can edit the form. And this is the kind of interface that users will see to provide information. What was essential here is that these forms are not just the basic single field form, one after the other, but that we can introduce the different kinds, from radio buttons to uploading the files to the drop down menus, that they can be different size, adjusted, that we can group them into what we call sections, and that we can also introduce this custom field as we go. The location and position of these fields can be drag and dropped and moved around. The whole idea was that without a lot of effort, you can create a very professional looking forms. And there are only businesses who does only this. They're only doing the form editing. Well, we pretty much, in our case, we had to incorporate that into as a part of the process. But these forms are defined with its own sort of a configuration structure, and they can carry the options. They can carry the results, obviously, as we go through the form, and they can be upgraded as needed and create a kind of next version of the process once we determine that maybe this field needs a help, and the extra procedure or extra documentation related to it, so that if somebody is onboarded and not very familiar, that they can get all the answer if needed, and maybe read once, and then they know the next time they will kind of skip and quickly answer. So idea with the forms was that we also addressed one of the fundamental challenges that we were discovering, which is ability to use these processes also as a way to knowledge transfer. To transfer the knowledge from other employees, and especially when you deal with a lot of different processes, we end up with a lot of different documents in different folders and categories, and they're kind of out of context of use, where we would like to actually bring that as a part of when they're needed. They're there, they're handy. You need to jump and go to another screen or open another document in order to see how to complete that form. The idea was that you stay with this focus and be able to get all the information required. The part of what I want to select next is the integration part, because the integration is the one of the challenging points, because the artifacts that every business has, the data that consists, can be stored in many different tables. Think about this as a different Excel tables, and they're all interconnected somehow and related, which Excel is not really built for it, but the databases are. And reality is that if you have different systems, maybe one portion is hosted by one cloud provider and different application, the other one by something else, where what you might need in your form is the information from one specific table that somebody already populated. In this case, I'm taking an example of something called catalog item. And as a part of the form that is integrated as a part of this form called catalog item field, we needed to display as a drop-down information that we already have from our systems. So this is actually one of the challenging part of, if this platform is standalone, how easily you can get this data. And these connectors and adapters, as I mentioned, are the ways to kind of point, choose, compatible, and that can kind of read this data from somebody else. In our case, we did not have to integrate with other systems, because what you see here are actually our own internal systems that we created over time. So therefore, by adding processes as a part of our platform and a part of our portals, pretty much all this where we have about our customers and suppliers and devices and all the different tables are then very easily integrated with the process. And not only being able to kind of retrieve the data in order to present as a choice, but also when at the end the process is finished, we can then as an outcome maybe create another location. Let's say if the process is setting up a new location for the customer, the outcome of that might actually then create a record and data into the locations table. Not point to read here, but just to kind of demonstrate complexity of successful process needs to have interaction with your data. And the last stage on automation is again, another complexity that we saw when evaluating other system is, if we want to automate something, there are processes, there are services that are predefined by vendors. So for example, send email is the good example. Instead of you manually going and opening Outlook and sending email, what we can do is that as a part of the process, generate that message, that body, and send to the customer. But when it comes to different type of automation that is not out of the box, such as send email, it was complex to be able to develop this. Now, that part is unfortunately requires a bit of more technical resources to do this, but we try to simplify by using JavaScript as a framework and making it sort of easy for developers to create these custom services, where you pretty much expect certain input to the service, and that kind of does the magic and goes back and retrieve. What you see here is the table that sort of maps input fields from the rest of the process that collected, and then obviously the output, what is generated after outcome. In this particular case, we're sending survey results to the customer. This is another big challenge of if we're creating a platform that is flexible, we needed to solve this problem of creating services easily and maintaining them, because if the form changes and there is another extra field, or let's say provisioning of the device that we're using requires now a different settings, we need to be able to rapidly introduce that extra field and then incorporate in a service so that we can upgrade and use the new version. And that's kind of another part that we could not find as easy from other platforms, and we leverage our framework that we developed.